How you doing there? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Chav Daled, Daf 24 of Masechta Shevuos. Friends, friends. Okay, Givaldig, yeah, Shevuos stuff. Let's go. Okay, Chav Gimel Amud Beis. Here we go. About 15 to 20 lines from the bottom of Chav Gimel Amud Beis. We're going to get today up to the next Mishnah. Is this the second Mishnah of? This might only be the. No, it's not the second Mishnah. Okay, third Mishnah, I guess. All right. Chav Gimel Amud Beis. About 15 lines from the bottom. There's a 2 dots over there. Shevuos shaloi oichal v'chule. Oh. So the Mishnah had said Shevuos shaloi oichal. No, so let's just read the Mishnah. Shevuos shaloi oichal. I'm reading in the Mishnah on Chav Beis Amud Beis. 4 lines before the bottom of the Mishnah. Okay, so the Mishnah had said that if he says that I'm not going to eat, okay, and then he ate things that are not re'uyin la'achila, or he drank things that are not re'uyin l'shasiyah, which reminds me, Chaver, I have some tea here that I'm eating. I'm eating some tea. So then he's potter, right? If he eats or drinks things that are not ra'ui le'achila or ra'ui l'shasiyah, he's potter. However, then the Mishnah says Shevuos shaloi oichal. He says a Shevuah that I'm not going to eat. Ve'achol nevelis u'treifis shkotzim u'remosim chayiv. But if he says I'm not going to eat, and then he eats nevelis, treifis, shkotzis, and remosis, so the Tanakam, the Chacham say chayiv. So the shailas, and this is what the Gemara is asking about now. Why? On the one hand, we said if it says Shevuos shelo ochal, then he eats things that are not ra'ui la'achila, he's potter. But then it says if he eats nevelis, treifas, shkotzis, and remosis, he's chayiv. Right? Meaning we said ein ra'ui la'achila is potter, and these things he's chayiv. So frek the Gemara hagufa kasha. It's oxymoronical. On the one hand, Omar Shevuos shaloi oichal v'ochal ochlin she'ein ru'uyin la'achila v'shosam ashrin she'ein ru'uyin l'shasiyah potter. On the one hand, the Mishnah had said Shevuos shaloi ochal, Shevuah that I'm not going to eat, and he eats things that are not ro'i la'achila or ro'i l'shasiyah, he's potter. And then v'hodar tani, but then you teach Shevuos shaloi oichal v'ochal nevelus u'treifis shkotzim u'remosim chayav. But then you're saying Shevuos shelo ochal, you eat nevelis, treifis, shkotzis, and remosis, and you're saying chayiv. Ma'ishna reisha the potter, ma'ishna sefer the chayiv. How come in the reisha you're potter, and in the sefer you're chayiv? Shouldn't those all be considered things that are not roi la'achila? Haloi kasha. Reisha b'stam v'sefer b'mifarish. Okay. So we say it's a good question. A valid question. Here's the thing. If all you say is Shevuos shelo ochal, I'm not going to eat. General statement, I'm not going to eat. So then, if you eat things that are not ro'ei l'achila, and we're assuming for now that includes nevelis, treifis, shkotzis, and remosis. So you're going to be potter, because those are not, when we say Shevuos shelo ochal, we're excluding those kinds of things. But if he says Shevuos shelo ochal, nevelas, treifas, shkotzis, and remosis, then he's being explicit, he's being direct. He's saying, I'm not going to eat nevelas, treifas, shkotzis, and remosis, and he does. So then he's chayiv. Okay? So again, lokasha reisha bestam. So reisha is bestam when he generalizes, I'm not going to eat, and then he eats those things, he's potter. V'sefer b'mefarish, and in the sefer he's being explicit that he's not going to eat these things. So if he eats these things that he explicitly said he's not going to, he's going to be chayiv. Mefarish nami gufei tikshe. But the Gemara asks that even so. If he says, I'm not going to eat nevelis, treifis, shkotzis, and remosis, and then he eats them, why is he chayiv? Mefarish nami gufei. Tikshe Amai. Why should he be chayiv? Mushbe me'ar Sinai hu. The Torah already says you can't eat nevelas, treifas, shkotzes, and ramases. So I think from now on I'm just going to refer to nevelas because I think it'll be easier if we just work with one thing. I think Rashi tends to work with one thing. Maybe even the Gemara. I don't know. So I'm just going to work with nevelas, okay? Nevelas, the Torah says you can't eat nevela. So by him making a shvuah shelo ochal nevela, it's irrelevant because he's mushba v'omid. There's already a shvuah that he's not. He's already mush, but he's already oathed, he's already sworn not to eat nevela and ain't shvuah chalal shvuah. So his shvuah that he's not shelo ochal nevela should be irrelevant. So why is he chayav? So Rav Ushmuel of Rabbi Yochanan, we've seen this machlokes already. The Amrei b'choilo dvarim amutarin im dvarin ha'asum v'shlakish amar yata moitze elo im mufarish chatzisir v'ali b'dor abonon im b'stam ali b'dor b'kiv damar adam osir atzma b'cholshu. Okay, just going to eat a little bit of tea. So Rav Shmuel, so it's machlokes Rav Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan on the one hand, and Rish Lakish on the other hand. So Rav Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan explain why he's chayiv. Because he's kola, what is it? B'chol dvarim. Hamutarim dvarim asurim. Basically, according to them, he's mefarish. He's saying, Shvuah shelo ochal nevela, okay? As well as shchuta. I'm not going to eat nevela, I'm also not going to eat properly shechted kosher meat. And therefore, yes, if all he said was Shvuah shelo ochal nevela, you're right, mush bavomid ma'asinai. But because he added to it and says, I'm not going to eat nevela and I'm also not going to eat shchuta, so migoy, since the shvuah will be relevant, will be chal for the shchuta, for the kosher meat, so then it also will be chal on everything else that he said, including the nevela. So since it's a valid shvuah vis-a-vis the shchuta, so it's also valid vis-a-vis the nevela, and if he eats nevela, he will be chayav a korban shvuas bitui, a korban olav v'yored. Can he eat some tea? Okay, so Rav Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan say because he's kol el dvar ma'amutarim dvar ma'asurim. Rish Lakish has a different approach. He says the reason why you'd be chayav for eating nevela is because, so either according to the Chachamim say that by default a shvuah talks about a shir, a kazais, right? Whereas Rabbi Akiva disagrees and says by default a shvuah is talking about a kolshu, any amount. So maybe let's start with Rabbi Akiva, maybe it's a little bit easier. So by default, according to Rabbi Akiva, it applies to any amount. So the thing is, what's aser midoraisa by nevela? A kezayis of nevela is aser. So he's mushba v'omed me'ar Sinai not to eat a kezayis of nevela. However, according to Rabbi Akiva, a stam shvuah shelo ochal is for any amount. So he's not mushba v'omed for eating just a bite of nevela, assuming that it's less than a kezayis, a tiny amount of nevela. He's not mushba v'omed for that. It would have to be a kazais. So, according to Rabbi Akiva, a stam, a shvuah, is a kolshu, is any amount, and he's not mushba v'omid for any amount of nevela, and that is why the shvuah is chal. Because now he'll be chayiv he'll have to be in korban shvuah if he eats any amount of nevela. According to the Chacham, who said that by default a shvuah applies to a kazayis, and he's mushba v'omid already for a kazayis, well, if he explicitly says, shvuah shelo ochal, chatzi shir, chatzi kazayis of nevela, well, then he explicitly says that he's talking about less than a kazayis of nevela. And again, midoraisa, a kazayis is also, and he's saying that his shvuah is for half a kazayis, and therefore he's not mushba me'ar Sinai, but if he eats half a kazayis of nevela, he will have to bring a korban shvuas bitui. Okay, so let's read it inside. So Rav Shmuel of Rabbi Yochanan the Amrei Bechol dvar ma'mutarim and dvar ma'asurim. The reason why he's chayev for eating nevela, even though yes, he's mushba v'omid me'asinai, but it's because he is saying Shevuos shelo ochal nevela v'shchuta as well as shchuta, and since the shvua is chal for the shchuta, it's also chal for the nevela, and if he eats nevela, he'll be chayev a korban shvuas bitui. If he eats it by accident. And Rish Lakish Amar says, Rish Lakish, his opinion is, according to the rabbis who say that by default, Shevuos shelo ochal nevela would be a kazayis nevela, and he's already mushba va'omid me'arsinai for that. So for them, he explicitly says Shevuos shelo ochal chatzi kazayis of nevela, which is not mushba va'omid me'arsinai for, and therefore he would be chayiv a korban shvuah for that. Or according to Rabbi Kiva, the Amar who says Adam Oser Asma B'cholshu, according to Rabbi Kiva who says that Shevuos shelo ochal nevela would apply to any amount of nevela. So by default already, Rabbi Kiva would say that he'd be chayiv because he's not mushba v'omid me'arsinai for any amount, only for a kazayis and above. Bishlam Rabbi Yochanan le'amar Rish Lakish. I understand why Rabbi Yochanan does not hold like Rish Lakish, dimukim la lemas nisin k'divrei hakol, because while Rish Lakish has to have two different ukimtas, one for the Chachamim who say that by default a shvuah applies to kazayis, and one for Rabbi Kiva who says that by default it applies to any amount. So he has to say, well, according to the Chachamim, he's mefarish chatzi shir. According to Rabbi Kiva, it's by default. Rabbi Yochanan says, look, I prefer my opinion, because I don't have to make these distinctions. I could just say b'kol advarim ha'mutarim dvarim ha'asurim, and so therefore I can understand why Rabbi Yochanan would say, look, I prefer my opinion. It goes over smoother. Okay. Eli Rish Lakish, my time Rabbi Yochanan. Why does Rish Lakish not hold like Rabbi Yochanan? Answers Rish Lakish, ki aminan iser kolel be'iser abba me'elov. I think that this is going to come up later as well. Yeah. Yes. This is an interesting concept. Says Rish Lakish, look. This concept of kolel, kol dvarim amutarim dvarim asurim. This concept, it cannot be applied liberally. Says Rish Lakish, it can't be applied to all scenarios. Where, says Rish Lakish, where is this concept of a kolel applied? I'm going to eat some tea. This concept of kolel is applied, says Rish Lakish, when it happens on its own. And I'll give an example of that in a second. But when it happens because a person decided to say a Shevuos shelo ochal nevela as well as shchuta, he's the one deciding what the kolel is. That is not a kolel. So what would be an example of one that happens on its own? Yom Kippur. Okay, so as Yidden, we're not allowed to eat nevela. We're allowed to eat salad. We're not allowed to eat nevela. Nevela we're not allowed to eat. We are allowed to eat salad. We're not allowed to eat nevela. Comes Yom Kippur, so the shaila is, okay, so Yom Kippur, if you eat on Yom Kippur intentionally, it's a chiyuv kares. If you eat by accident, it's a korban chatas. So if I accidentally eat salad on Yom Kippur, I'm chayiv to bring a korban chatas. What if I accidentally eat nevela? Now, nevela is also every day of the year. And nevela is not a chiyuv. If I eat nevela, it's not a chiyuv kares, so I don't have to bring a korban chatas for shirgagas kares. But eating nevela is a lav; it's not a chiyuv kares, and therefore I don't need to bring a korban chatas if I eat nevela. I don't need to bring a korban chatas if I eat nevela. What if I eat nevela though on Yom Kippur? So the shaila is: do we say, well, since on Yom Kippur, not only are you not allowed to eat nevela, you're not even allowed to eat salad, you're not allowed to eat anything. So the shaila is, do we say that since on Yom Kippur, this chiyuv chatos for accidentally eating applies to more than just nevela. It's applied across the board. It even includes things like salad, which normally you are allowed to eat. So do we say that just like you would have to bring a korban chatas for bringing salad, and since it applies for things that are generally mutter like salad, so it also applies to nevela, and if you accidentally eat nevela, you ochit would need to bring a korban chatas. Or not. Or do we say, no, we don't have this concept of kolel, and since nevela is osir every day of the year, it's just as osir on Yom Kippur, just like every day of the year, there's no korban chatas. Also, if you eat nevela accidentally on Yom Kippur, there's no korban chatas. So argues Reish Lakish that we will say kolel for something like Yom Kippur. Comes Yom Kippur, all of a sudden, you're not allowed to eat, in addition to being prohibited from eating nevela, you're also not allowed to eat everything. I didn't do anything. I didn't say, okay, now I'm deciding it's Yom Kippur. No, Yom Kippur comes, and on its own, the prohibition of eating kicks in, and it kicks in globally, and because it kicks in globally, it includes everything, including nevela. So Reish Lakish says in that kind of a scenario, we'll have this concept of kolel, right? That nevela will be chayav v'chatas since everything's chayav v'chatas for being eaten on Yom Kippur. However, argues Reish Lakish, the concept of kolel doesn't apply when I'm saying Shevuos shelo ochal nevela u'shchuta, and I'm deciding what's included in the shvua, and I say that in addition to nevela, also shchuta. That no, on your own, you can't make your own kolels. Kolels have to kind of just be their own kind of thing that happen on their own. For example, eating on Yom Kippur. So again, where am I? So Reish Lakish, my time lo Amar Rabbi Yochanan. I'm on the bottom line of Chav Gimel Amud Beis. Amar Lach, because Reish Lakish will respond to you ki aminon iser koilel, when we have this concept of a kolel, that that kolel dvarim amutarim and dvarim asurim bisra ba me'elav, that's for things that just kind of happen on their own. For example, nevela on Yom Kippur. Bisra ba yidei atzmo lo aminon. But when these things, come, right. I guess an iser abba me'elav kilu, the iser, the thing that's being added. Right? If you look at Yom Kippur, right, the iser abba me'elav. Right, I'm not making salad also on Yom Kippur. It becomes also on its own on Yom Kippur, because everything becomes also on its own on Yom Kippur, and that includes nevela as well. But Isra Abayi de Atzmo, when I'm defining the Isra, when I'm defining that what's the added thing to nevela? Shchuta, and I'm defining that Shevuos shelo ochal shchuta. That isn't a kolel kind of situation. Only when the thing being added happens memela. I'm going to eat some more tea. Okay. Fine. Bishlome li Reish Lakish. I understand Reish Lakish's opinion. Mishum hachi ka pater Reb Shimon. The Tanya Reb Shimon Omer kol shu limakis. V'Omer kazai sel lekorban. El Reb Yochanan my taima. De Reb Shimon de pater. Hoy 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 da. Says the Gemara, I understand Reish Lakish's opinion. Why? Because the Mishnah had said, Shevuos shelo ochal, ve'ochal nevelis trefish shkotzes rumasis. So the Chacham had said chayiv, Reb Shimon had said potter. Now, the question was, how could the Chacham say chayiv? How could the Chacham say chayiv? After all, Mushbav Omed Me'ar Sinai. He's already not allowed to eat nevela. So why should he be chayiv when he says Shevuos shelo ochal and then he eats nevela? So Reish Lakish had said, well, because nevela is asur b'kizayis. Here we're talking about where the shvua is being applied to less than a kizayis, and the isser of nevela doesn't apply to less than a kizayis. So now here he's making asur less than a kizayis, and that's where there's a korban. And I can understand then why Reb Shimon says potter, because Reb Shimon, as we learned in Masechta Makis, says that that you're chayiv for nevela. Nevela is not a chiyav kares but a chiyav makis. You're chayiv, not a chiyav kares, not a chiyav korban, but makis for a kol shu. So therefore, Reb Shimon says that the Isser of eating nevela applies to any amount, not a kazayas. So therefore Reb Shimon says, look, I don't care what you say in your shvua, nevela is also bechol shuv, any amount, and therefore if you make a shvua not to eat nevela, a shvua shelo ochal nevela, it's automatically going to be mushba v'omid me'ar Sinai, because you're not allowed to eat any amount of nevela anyway. So even if you say chatzi, there's no chatzi, any amount is osir. So therefore, Reb Shimon says memela, you're going to be potter. But according to Rabbi Yochanan, who says that the reason why the Chacham say that you're chayiv is because it's a kolel. You're saying that shelo ochal nevela v'shchuta, and because b'kol dvar ma'mutarim dvar ma'asurim, and therefore because he's adding the things that are mutar, right, shchuta. So therefore, you bring a korban also if you eat nevela. Reb Shimon should agree, meaning based on this principle, that's a principle that there should be no difference between the Chacham and Reb Shimon, because the whole point is that even if you say that nevela is asur, but because you're adding shchuta, so then you bring a korban for nevela because of the kolel of shchuta, meaning according to the Chachamim, you're saying like according to Reb Yochanan, the concept is that even if it's already asur, the reason why the shvuah applies to it is because you're including things that are mutter, so that should be just as relevant to Reb Shimon as it is to the Chacham, that even if it's asur, you're still going to bring a korban because he's including things that are mutter. So again, Bishlam the Rish Lakish, I understand Rish Lakish's opinion. Mishum Ochika Potter Reb Shimon. I can understand why Reb Shimon says Potter, because there's no shiur where nevela would be permitted that the shvuah can apply to. The Tanya, as one of the Bais of Reb Shimon Omer says, Reb Shimon kol shehu lemakis, that for the chi of makis, such as by nevela, even the smallest amount is asur v'lo amru kazayis el korban. The shear of a kazayis is for korbanis, but there's no korban by nevela. Ela the Reb Yochanan, my time to Reb Shimon the potter. According to Reb Yochanan, though, why would Reb Shimon say potter? Because when he's including the shchuta, so then it also includes even the nevela, which is already asur. So Reb Shimon should also say chayv. Midi utaima elam mishum iser kolel. To which the Gemara answers, that's not a good question. Why is it not a good question? Well, because what's the question? The question is that why does Reb Shimon say potter? After all, according to Reb Yochanan, he explains that it's about this kolel, and this kolel should come to include even the nevela. Reb Shimon doesn't hold of kolels. Reb Shimon the Taime did leisle iser kolel. Although, of course, Reb Shimon in Masechta Brachos, in the shaila of should you work or should you learn, Reb Shimon, I think his opinion was that you should learn. You should go to kolel. So I guess he holds of certain kinds of kolels, but not other kinds of kolels. This kind of kolel that we're talking about in our Gemara, he doesn't hold of. So this kind of kolel, Reb Shimon is not a fan of. Desanya, as one in the Brayso, Reb Shimon says, Reb Shimon, ha'ocha nevela b'yom ha'kippurim. Somebody eats nevela on Yom Kippur, potter. He's exempt from bringing a korban, because the only reason why he would have to bring a korban is because even though nevela is always asur, but since on Yom Kippur everything's asur, and you bring a korban for those things if you eat them by accident, so also nevela. But Reb Shimon doesn't agree with that. He doesn't hold of the concept of kolel, and therefore Rabbi Yochanan is saying, look, according to the Chacham, who do hold of the concept of kolel, it's talking about where he says, so it's talking about where he says, Shevuos ochal nevela ushchuta. Therefore, you're chayiv to bring a korban also for the nevela. But according to Reb Shimon, he doesn't hold of the concept of kolel. Therefore, you're going to be potter, because you can't make a nevela is already asur and mushba v'omin. I was doing chazar last night, so it's Lag Boimer today. So last night I went to a hilula. I went to a hilula last night for Lag Boimer, and there, while everybody else, while everybody was, not everybody, but while most people were outside reveling by the medura, I had my own kind of medura, I guess you can say. I was learning about Reb Shimon inside. I was learning about what Reb Shimon says in the Gemara. Bishlam the Rish Lakish, Mishkach Haslo. bilav vehein. So I understand according to Rish Lakish, okay, because the pasuk says ba Shevuos bitui lahara or laheitiv, negative or positive. So I understand according to Rish Lakish how you can have negative versions and positive versions, right? Shevuos shelo ochal chatzi shir nevela. Okay, Shevuos shelo ochal chatzi shir nevela. Shevuos she'ochal chatzi shir nevela. Because the Isser nevela is only once you hit a kazayis. Now, according to Rabbi Yochanan, I don't understand. So I understand how you could say Shevuos shelo ochal nevela ushchuta, but how can you say Shevuos she'ochal nevela ushchuta? How can you say I'm going to eat a kazayis of nevela? Right, so Bishlam the Rish Lakish, Mishkachas la belavehein. I can understand according to Rish Lakish, I can have the negative version and the positive version. I won't eat half a shear of nevela. I will eat half a shear of nevela. Although Rabbi Yochanan, according to Rabbi Yochanan, who's saying that it's talking about a full shear, and the only reason why he's chayav is because he included things that are mutter. So Bishlam lav Mishkachas la. So I understand you can have the negative version. Shevuos shelo ochal nevela ushchuta. But how can you have a scenario where it says Shvuah she'ochal nevela ushchuta? How can you make a Shvuah to eat a kazayis of nevela? So ela kidei rove, rather it's like rove. Chevre, we are not talking about where he's being explicit. We are not talking about where he's saying Shvuah she'ochal nevela ushchuta. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about where he says simply, Shevuos shelo ochal. I won't eat. And that applies to everything. And it applies to salad. It applies to nevela. I won't put anything in my mouth. Shevuos shelo ochal. And yes, it's true that he's mushba v'omed me'ar Sinai when it comes to nevela, but this is bigger than just nevela. Shevuos shelo ochal, I won't eat anything. And therefore, it's not explicitly therefore, what's the negative? Shevuos shelo ochal, right? Shevuos shelo ochal. I won't eat anything. He's not saying anything specifically about nevela, but it includes nevela, it includes salad, it includes everything. Shevuos she'ochal, and he's not saying Shevuos she'ochal nevela. No, he's just saying Shevuos she'ochal. He's making Shevuah that he's going to eat. And therefore, therefore that's a valid Shevuah she'ochal that I'm going to eat. But he's not explicitly saying that he's going to eat nevela. Rather, it's like Rava. The Amar Rava says, Rava, Shevuos shelo ochal. If a person says Shevuos shelo ochal, that I won't eat, generally, v'ochal offer potter. He says Shevuos shelo ochal, that I won't eat, and then he eats dirt, so then he is potter. And therefore, to answer our original question of, hey, this Mishnah doesn't make sense. On the one hand, we're saying Shevuah shelo ochal, and he eats dvarim she'enim ruin la'achila. He's potter, and then we said, but he's at the same time we said Shevuah shelo ochal, and he eats the nevela shevish kotzer masmi. He's chayev. What's the difference? Why is he potter in the Reisha and chayev in the Seifa? Because so we had said earlier, the reason because he said specifically nevela and treifa. No, we're not talking about that anymore. He didn't say anything specifically. But when he says Shevuos shelo ochal, it's talking about things that are edible, things that normally people don't eat dirt. No, I don't care if you keep kosher, you don't eat kosher. No one's going to take a spoonful of dirt and eat that. So therefore, right? So if it says Shevuos shelo ochal, it doesn't apply to dirt. However, when it comes to nevelas, right? When it comes to nevela is perfectly edible food, right? If you mess up in the shechita, so it's treif, you can't eat it, but it's the same animal that if you would have done it properly, you could eat it. It's food. Just the Rabbanan Shalom says, look, if it's not shechted properly, don't eat it. But it is achila. So if when he says Shevuos shelo ochal and he eats something that people don't eat, like dirt, so then he's potter. But if he eats something that people do eat, just the Rabbanan Shalom says don't eat, like nevela, well then you're going to be chayiv for violating the Shvua, but it's stam. He's not saying specifically I'm not going to eat nevela. Okay. So Elik Rav, rather it's like Rav Dam Rav says Rav Shvua Shelo Ochal, right? If he says Shvua Shelo Ochal ve'Ochal offer and he eats dirt, potter, right? But if he eats nevela, which is something that is food, just not for us, you're going to be chayav for that. But he's not saying anything explicitly. Omer of Mari says Rav Mori Afonam Tonino. We learn in our Mishnah Koinam Ishti Ne'nis Li Im Ochalti Ayem. He says that my wife is forbidden from getting benefit from me if I ate anything today. And guess what? And he had eaten nevelas, treifas, shkotzes, and ramasses. Harishto asura lo, and we say that his wife is asura to him. So apparently, eating nevelas, treifas, shkotzes, and ramasses is considered achila. To which the Gemara says, that's not necessarily a proof. Came to me kara ochal v'hadar ishtabale, that since he first ate them before ever making a shvuah, on his own volition he went and ate them, so he indicated that these are things that are chashuv to him, right? Since he had initially eaten them on his own and then made a shvuah about them, chashuve achshuve, he had made them chashuv, and because you can argue that because he made him chashuv, that is why it's considered achila, and his wife is asura to him. Mi achshuve, but in this scenario, where it says Shvuah Shelo Ochal and he eats nevelas, treifas, shkotzes, and ramasses, we don't necessarily assume that we might not necessarily assume that that it's so obvious that these things are considered chashuv. Okay, fine. I don't know. Maybe he's just eating them because there's nothing else to eat. I don't know, right? Because he says he's not going to eat. But anyways, okay. So meaning, okay. So who is this? Rav Mari? Who is this? So Rav Mari tried to bring an example from the guy who says that his wife is asura to him if he ate anything today and he had already eaten those things. So there we can argue that hey, over there he was machshavit. That's why it's chayav. It's not necessarily proof that these things are considered achila. Okay, fine. Omar Rove says Rove, my time in the man the Omar the Islay Isser Kolel mi the Hava Isser Mosif man the Potter the Leisley Kyomer Isser Mosif Bichad Chaticha Bishtei Chatiches Lo Amrinon. This is really interesting. This is interesting in my opinion. In my opinion, this is interesting because we are going to define Isser Kolel and Isser Mosif. We're going to define Isser Kolel versus Isser Mosif. Who could tell me what the difference between a Kolel and a Mosif is? Because, right, so let's read it inside again. Amarova says, over my time in the man the Islay Kolel, what's the rationale for the opinion who holds of the concept of Kolel? Right. For example, we had talked about right. So for example, when it comes to Yom Kippur, so it's talk right. So Yom Kippur, we had said that when it comes to nevela on Yom Kippur, one opinion is that since it's asur, right. So you can never eat nevela, but since on Yom Kippur you also can't eat salad, you can't eat anything. So therefore, it's kolel also the nevela, and you'd be chayiv a korban chatas for eating nevela on Yom Kippur. Reb Shimon didn't hold of that because it doesn't hold of kolel. So according to the opinion who holds of the concept of kolel, my time of demand is like isser kolel. What's the rationale for the opinion who holds of Isser Kolel? Mida the Hava Isser Mosif. Well, there's a concept of Isser Mosif. So man depotar deleisle, and the mandam who doesn't hold of Kolel, ki omer Isser Mosif v'chad chaticha b'shtei chatichos lo aminan. Look, einachinami, there's the concept of Mosif, but Mosif is for one piece, whereas Kolel is for multiple pieces. What's going on here? It's very interesting. So, classically, like in brisk, they have this big distinction between chefze and gavra. It's a very brisk kind of thing. Chefze and gavra. I don't have much experience with chefze and gavra, but this just screams and yells chefze and gavra. I have to imagine that this would fit under the category of chefze and gavra. It just screams and yells chefze and gavra. What is the chefza? The chefza is the piece of meat. What's the gavra? The gavra is the person who's eating the meat. Let's take a look at mosif. What's mosif? Mosif is on the chefza, is on the meat itself. For example, if you have chaylev, I'm taking these examples right out of Rashi. For example, if you have chaylev, now chaylev, I'm not allowed to eat chaylev. I'm not allowed to eat chaylev, right? Chaylev, of course, if you eat it, it's chiv kars. And if you eat it by accident, it's a korban chatos. Now, what happens if you bring a korban shlomim and the korban shlomim, so the chaylev is part of the emurim, and it should go on the mizbeach. If I'm not mistaken. We'll clarify all these details when we get to Seder Kodshim, but I think the chaylev is part of the emurim that you put on the mizbeach, and that goes to the bani shalom. And what if it was noser? What if you didn't get it up on the mizbeach on time and it was left over? It was noser. Well, now, in addition to chaylev just being chaylev, this same exact fat is also to me not just because it's chaylev, but also because now it's noser. And at this point, it can't even go on the mizbeach anymore. Chaylev normally is part of the emurim; it goes on the mizbeach. Now that it's noser, it can't go on the mizbeach anymore. So for me personally, I wasn't allowed to eat it before. I'm not allowed to eat it afterwards. But now, for this piece of fat itself, there's an added layer to it. That initially, this piece of fat, I wasn't allowed to eat it because it's chaylev, but the mizbeach could eat it. It could go on the mizbeach. But once it wasn't put on the mizbeach on time, not only is this chaylev, it's also now noser, and it can't even go on the mizbeach anymore. So this piece of meat, which was initially just chaylev, this piece of meat is now not just chaylev, it is now also noser. And whereas initially only I was not allowed to eat it, or people were not allowed to eat it, but now even the mizbeach can't eat it. If now I eat this chaylev, I'm going to have to bring 2 korban chatases. One for chaylev, and one for noser. And that is mosif. That this added layer was added to the meat, to in this case the fat itself. This chaylev was initially just chaylev. Now this chaylev, in addition to being chaylev, it's also noser. Kolel is where nothing changes in the thing itself, but my Isser layers are added onto me. So for example, on Yom Kippur, right? So, well, normally you can't eat nevela, right? If an animal is killed improperly, right, is not shechted, I can't eat it. Comes Yom Kippur, I still can't eat it. Right, nothing changed, right? I wasn't allowed to eat it beforehand. Nobody was allowed to eat it beforehand. It was nevela beforehand, it's still nevela now. Comes Yom Kippur, it's still nevela. The thing is that on Yom Kippur, not only can't I eat nevela, I also can't eat anything. Normally I can eat salad. But now comes Yom Kippur, not only can't I eat nevela, I also can't eat salad, I can't eat anything. So now we're saying that since comes Yom Kippur, in addition to being unable to eat nevela, I also can't eat salad. And if I eat salad, it's a korban chatas. Let's say that since if I eat salad, it's a korban chatas, let's also apply that to nevela. Normally if I eat nevela, there's no korban chatas. The day before Yom Kippur, it's also because it's nevela. On Yom Kippur, it's still nevela. So therefore, we'd want to say, okay, it's also because of nevela. It's not also because of Yom Kippur. We say, yes, but since comes Yom Kippur, not only is nevela usher, but also even salad is usher. And if you eat salad, you have a korban chatas. So let's also say that if you eat nevela, you're going to be chayav a korban chatas as well. But it's not like on Yom Kippur, there was some kind of mutter aspect to nevela that now becomes aser. Right? When it comes to the chaylev, initially he was able to go on the mizbeach. Now that it's noser, it can no longer go on the mizbeach. Whereas nevela, it's not like anybody was ever allowed to eat nevela. No, nothing changed in that regard. It's just that now it's Yom Kippur, I also can't eat anything. I can't eat salad. So okay, fine, since you can't eat salad also, so then we'll say that if you eat nevela, you also chayav a korban chatas also, even though like nothing technically changed in the nevela. So therefore, according to the opinion who says that this kolel concept is relevant, and since I can't eat salad, and if I eat salad, it's korban chatas, we'll also apply that to nevela. We'll say that, well, since there's the concept of mosif, right, you can add on layers, and by chaylev, whereas normally I'd be chay for chaylev, it becomes noser, I'm chay for chaylev and noser. So therefore, also when it comes to kolel, also since the Isra Achila was kind of expanded to not just be nevela, but anything, and those other things will have a chiyuv chatas, so then also nevela will have a chiyuv chatas. Whereas the opinion who doesn't hold of kolel says, look, the concept of mosif applies to one piece of meat, right? This chaylev was initially chaylev. Now this same chaylev is not just chaylev anymore. It's now chaylev and it's noser. That's where we say mosif. But to say that when nothing changes to the nevela itself, but since I can't eat salad now, where before I could eat salad, before I wasn't allowed to eat nevela, I was allowed to eat salad. Now I'm still not allowed to eat nevela, but now I'm also not allowed to eat salad. So now all of a sudden, I should be chayav a korban chatas for nevela since I'm chayav a korban chatas for salad. So the one who doesn't hold of kolel says, look, kolel is something applies that, adding layers to one thing. But to add layers to something else is not going to affect the initial thing. So Amar Rava says, Rava, my time demand the islay iser kolel, according to the opinion who does hold of kolel, how come? Bizave iser mosif. Well, there's the concept of layering on for mosif, right? For example, chaylev and noser. So therefore, we can also say that just like you're chayav a korban for salad, you can also be chayav a korban for nevela. So Oman de potar, and the opinion who says that you're potter for kolel, de leisle, it doesn't hold the concept of kolel ki omer iser mosif b'chad chaticha. When we talk about mosif, we're talking about adding layers to one particular, right, to one thing, right? Chaylev, it was just chaylev. Now this isn't just chaylev anymore; it's chaylev and noser. But b'shtei chatichos, where nothing changes to the nevela itself, just that to say that, well, now it's not just nevela that's aser, but it's also salad that's aser, right? So then, lo amrinon, we don't say kolel there. Amar Rava says, Rava lamanda islay iser kolel, the opinion who holds of the concept of kolel. So Amar Shevuos shel ochal teinim, if a person who says, I'm making a shvuah that I'm not going to eat figs. Then he says, I'm making a shvuah that I'm not going to eat figs and grapes. So So normally if a person says, I'm not going to eat figs, I'm not going to eat figs. Right? So it doesn't apply to the second one because he already couldn't eat figs from the first shvuah. However, if you hold of kolel and you say shvuah shel ochal teinim, and then you say again shvuah shel ochal teinim va'anovim and grapes, well, since the second shvuah will be applied to the grapes, then it's applied another time to the figs as well. And if you eat figs by accident, you have to bring 2 korban shvuahs bituis. Pshita, that's obvious. Shouldn't that just be a classic case of kolel? So Ma'odetema, I may have thought Isra Abami Eilav Aminon, Isra Abami Atzmalamin Kamash Malon. Like we saw earlier, well, I may have had the havminute to say that when my opinion holds of kolel, he specifically holds it like in the context of Yom Kippur, where salad is added to the things that you're not allowed to eat on its own. Comes Yom Kippur, all of a sudden you're not allowed to eat these other things. But if I explicitly say I'm not going to eat figs and grapes, where I'm the one making the things aser, maybe we wouldn't say kolel there. So what Rava is saying is that if you hold of kolel, you would hold of kolel even when you're the one making the things aser. Mosiv Rava Brei de Rabba. Now Rava Brei de Rabba asks the following question: Yesh oichel achila achas v'chayv ola aleo arba chatos v'ashim echad. You can have a person eat one thing, and by eating that one thing, he's chayav 4 chatases and an asham. Ve'luhen, here we go. Tame, you have a guy's tame, shachal chalev, and he's eating chalev. Okay, so for eating chalev, you chayav a korban chatas. If you eat chalev by accident. Vehu noser, and the chalev also is noser. So you chayav another korban chatas for eating noser. Mina mukdashin, and it's hektish. So now you're also tame shachal as a kodesh, which of course we know is a korban olav yored, which is a chatas. So that's chatas number 3. And because also you're getting benefit from hektish, that's me'ila, which is an asham. But Yom Kippurim, and it's Yom Kippur, so you chayav a korban chatas for that. So 4 korban chatases and 1 asham. Rav Meir Omer, it says Rav Meir, af imoisa Shabbos, and the Gos Abach adds bifiv, okay, chayav. And also if it happens to be Shabbos as well, and you take it out to Rishus, from Rishus Hotzah, Rishus L'Rishus, then you also have to bring another korban chatas for Chilul Shabbos. Amulo Eino Min Hashem, to which I say, leave that out. We're talking about Achila, we're not talking about Hotzah. Okay. V'misa. Now, if it's true that there's this concept of kolel, and that I can, add my own kolels, right? If I write Shevuos shel ochal teinim, Shevuos shel ochal teinim v'anovim, well then we can have a 5th korban chatas. Mishkachas lo chomesh. We could have a scenario with a 5th korban chatas, kigon, for example, Shomer Shevuos shel ochal tamarim v'chelev. And he also had said that Shvuah, that I'm not going to eat dates and chelev. And since the Shvuah is relevant for the dates, it's relevant also for the chelev. And therefore, by eating this chelev, he's going to also have to bring a korban Shvuah's bitoy. So, and for the Gemara, look, kikatone, you're right. You are right, 100% you're right. But this brisa is talking about Isra b'me'elav. We're talking about isurim that are happening on their own. Isra b'me'atzma lo katani. It simply is not listing isurim that the person himself is making asur on his own. So while you're right that if he says Shevuos shel ochal tamarim v'chelev, you're right that it would be a kolel, but this brisa just simply isn't talking about things that he himself is making asur. V'arei hektish. But what about hektish? Hektish was on the list, and people are makdish, right? If it's an animal that you were makdish, b'bechor. Well, we could say it's talking about a bechor, the kedushaso merechem, that is born kadosh. Ibai sema. Alternatively, kikatani, what the brisa is talking about, midi deleis le she'elim. The brisa is specifically listing things that you can't, go to a chacham and ask to reverse. Shvuah de'isle she'ela, whereas a shvuah that you can go to a chacham and ask to reverse the shvuah, lo katani, they are not listed. Hari hektish, but what about hektish? You could be makdish something and then ask a chacham to reverse it. Ukmina b'bechor. Yeah, but we said it's talking about a bechor, which you can't reverse. Ibai same. Alternatively, kikatone korban kavua. Alternatively, the brisa is talking about korban chatases, which are it's a fixed korban. It's not a korban olav yori. Korban olav yori lo katani. We're not talking about korban olav yori, and korban Shevuos bito is a korban olav yori. Hare tamei shachal as a kodesh. The korban olav yori who? Yeah, but we listed tamei shachal as a kodesh. And that, of course, is right. Tumas Mikdash v'Kadoshav, as we learned about for the first 2 prakim, the first 20 daf of this Masechta, is a korban ola v'yored. So that's on the list. V'nasi v'Rabbi the Amar Nasi maybe Sa'ir. Well, we're talking about the Nasi is eating this, and according to Rabbi Eliezer, a Nasi who does Tamei Shachal Sakodesh would bring a fixed korban. Ravashi Omer says Ravashi ki katani. What we're talking about in the brisa is midi de chayle kishiur, something that is chayil on a specific amount, whereas shvuah de chayle apochus mikashir. But a shvuah, for example, if you say shvuah she'ochal chatzi shir, right? So that would be valid. Lo katani. So that was not listed. Varei hekdish. What about hektish? You don't necessarily need a kazayis of hektish. As long as you get a benefit of a value of a shava pruta, that's enough. Hab'in and shava pruta, yeah, but you still nonetheless need a shava pruta, and that's its share. Ravashi me avira amrib zera ki katani zdono koris zdono lav lo katani says Rav Ashi me avira, and then in Reb Zera that the Bryce is listing things that are chiyuv korises, not chiyuv lavs. Very osham zdono lav, but what about in osham, right? Meila. According to the Chacham, it's Machlokes Chacham and Rebbe. Chacham say that deliberately getting benefit from hektish is a lav. Rebbe says it's misa b'dei shamayim, but the Chacham say it's a lav. Vikatani, and that was listed. Bechatas coming in, we're talking about the korban chatas is on the list are things that have a chiyuv kares, and a Shevuos bito is just a lav. Ravina Omar says Ravina Kikatani, what's listed is the chayil amidi debar achila, who things that are specifically on food. Shvuah the chayla amidi delav bar achilahu, a shvuah which could be chal on things that are not food. They don't have to. A shvuah doesn't have to be related to food. For example, as we're going to learn in the next Mishnah, we're going to be talking about more things that aren't necessarily related to food. So therefore, the shvuah is excluded because it's not strictly food related. Parei hektish the chayil namia eitzim va'avonim. But hektish could apply to, wood and stones. Elaki katani, dechayil amidi teis be mashosha. Yeah, but the list is for things that have to be for things that are are tangible. Shvuah dechayil amidi de leis be mashosha could go into sheishim v'lo ishan lo katani. But it's not talking about shvuahs because shvuahs could be chal on things that aren't tangible, as we're about to learn in the next Mishnah, which we're going to stop now. But tomorrow. We're going to learn the next Mishnah, which talks about, for example, you could swear that you're going to sleep or not. That's intangible. So therefore, Shevuah is not listed because Shevuah could be chal even to things that are intangible. Givaldi. Well, that was daf Chav Daled of Masechta Shevuos. That was pretty interesting daf. We talked about some interesting stuff. We talked about Isser Kolels, which was interesting. Isser Mosif was also interesting. The Machlokus in Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. When it comes to nevela, in terms of being Isser Kolel or Chatzi Shir, these were all interesting things. Peace out.